I want this to be seen as just the start of a conversation that I would love to keep having here with you. And we can add a lot more sort of meat to the bones in the future, but I just want to set up the big ideas. There's all this excitement and these big challenges around things like technology and advances in neuroscience, and people have this sense that we might be on to something, that we might be able to do something special. And I have to say, I think that's true, but I'm a little worried that we're missing, for the shiny toy, we're missing some of the most important advancements that we can make and need to be made to actually realize some of the potential. So I just want to make an argument that the future, our ability to realize the potential of new technologies and new insights from neuroscience and learning sciences, the biggest barrier to that is a myth. This myth of the average. And most of you here, since this is a school that believes deeply in the individual, it feels like, well, wait a minute, But as you know, look, this idea of the average student has come to dominate almost every aspect of our educational system, from the way we design curricular materials, to the way we teach, to the way we assess what kids know. And I want to argue that overcoming this barrier is the single most important thing we can do to reach the potential of the new medium and the new opportunities. And I want to make the argument briefly with 3 examples, because I've been told if you want to get a better handle on things that are outside of your domain, it's good to step back and look for analogies and things in other domains. So that's what I want to do. I'm going to talk about shoes and brains and Rubik's Cubes to make my case. And this is, by the way, I was the kid that grew up in a school that got rid of art. So this is going to be the extent of my imagination for the 20 minutes. Maybe if I keep coming back to Ross, I'll get better at this. But for a moment, I want you to imagine that we live in a different world. So not a world that believes in the myth of the average learner, but a world that believes in the myth of the average foot. And let's call it a size 8.5, okay? Already I can tell people are far from that size. So just a quick, imagine that you're here right now, okay? We're in a world that believes in this myth of the average foot. We've been designing shoes around this average. And you're here today not because you're smart, but because we think you have great potential to be sprinters. So just a quick thought, first of all, you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to, if you're embarrassed about your foot size. But how many of you are pretty close to that, say, men's 8.5 roughly? Okay. How many of you are way on the other side? Size 11, 12, 13? Really? Well done, sir. It works really well with my talk, so I appreciate it. So if you think about where you are in relationship to this average foot and the shoe, the closer you are to this size 8.5, the more likely it is you could reach your full potential as a sprinter, whatever that is, right? But if you're a size 13, you're in big trouble, right? We'd probably just eventually say you have a running disorder, and tell you to swim. But the medium is going to affect your ability to recognize your full potential, okay? Second question. So I'm your coach, and you guys are terrible sprinters, right? And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to do? I'm going to get fired. So I think, okay, I'm going to spend a lot of money on shoe technology, which, by the way, I looked up. We spent a ton of money on shoe technology, way more than educational technology. So I dump a bunch of money into making absolutely the best running shoe that money can buy. And then the question is this: who benefits from the technology? If you're an 8.5, you get the full advantage of the technology. But if you're the size 13, the technology doesn't benefit you at all because the shoe didn't fit to begin with. We don't believe in this world of myth of an average foot because we can see the variability in foot size. And because we can see it, we design for it. And because we design for it, we're able to recognize talent that would have otherwise gone overlooked, like Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt, how many of you watched the Olympics? This is the fastest man in the world by far, right? I mean, for 2 consecutive Olympics, he's won gold in the 100, the 200, I think the 400, I mean, ridiculously fast, right? He is 6'5" and wears a size 13 shoe. it broke every mold about what a sprinter is supposed to be like. You're not supposed to be a great sprinter with this size until he came along, and now everyone's like, of course tall people make great sprinters. And but here's what's weird. We may not believe in this myth of the average foot, but I would argue we do believe in this myth of the average learner. And it's weird to me that we don't, we can sort of agree that people's feet vary naturally, but we don't extend that to the way that people learn, the way they take in information, the way they are demonstrating their creativity and their knowledge. We don't even extend it to our brains. But that one's kind of strange to me as someone who plays in this area for a living, right? Because your brain is made up of 100 billion neurons that all connect together to form vast interconnected networks that themselves are interacting with and being shaped by your environment. Yet somehow, magically, out of all of that complexity, we end up with the same brains, more or less on average. But the thing is that sounds crazy because it's not true. The take-home from modern neuroscience is the fact of variability. It is unbelievable. The more we've dived in with better technologies, the more we see just how unbelievable people are in terms of their variability. And when I come back again, I want to give you a lot more on the neuroscience. But for the sake of time, I wanted to say, okay, let's say you accept the fact that maybe our brains are really variable. But you could argue that, well, maybe that doesn't translate into learning environments at the level of behavior and cognition. So I want to show you why that's not true. And I want to take a very simple case. This is the most frustratingly simple task ever devised, right? Clear end goal, blue on one side, yellow on the other, right? Pretty simple rules. Most of us have tried it. Few of us have actually solved it, right? But I'm going to wager there are very, very few people in this audience who are what I would call experts at this, the speed cubers. These are people who can consistently solve a Rubik's Cube in under 30 seconds. I couldn't believe these people existed, okay? I couldn't believe it, but as a researcher, I got to study this group. Here's what's even more impressive. When you go into this expert group of speed cubers, it turns out that there are many different strategies that you can choose that will get you to expertise in speed cubing. For example, if you're really great at pattern recognition, your brain is just phenomenal, fast, recognize patterns, you don't have to memorize much. You just have to, every time you turn, you see the pattern instantly and you know the next turn, okay? If you're not good at pattern recognition like that, which most of us would not be probably, there are other kinds of strategies, including one where you memorize 50 algorithms. And if you can do that, then you only have to see the cube once, and you could do it blindfolded once you know the algorithm to use. The thing is that what's amazing to me is that there are all these people who can do it in under 30 seconds, and that there are 6 or 7 different strategies that are equally valid. This will get you to that 30 seconds. And the trick is that the one that would be right for you would depend on your own variability. And by the way, I can tell you the only strategy that definitely doesn't work, I did this as a kid because I never could solve these. You tear the stickers off, right? I was so methodical about this. Here's the people can totally tell you cheated, and it takes like way longer than 30 seconds. So the point is, just at the level of strategy, there's variability, and you can imagine a problem where you have somebody that's naturally gifted in pattern recognition, but they're in an environment that's only teaching algorithm strategy. They're going to look decidedly average at the Rubik's Cube by design, right? So I want to take this example and go from strategy and extend it to another type of variability, namely the way we take in information, and introduce you to a colleague of mine, TV Raman. Raman is a world-class computer programmer at Google. In fact, if you have an Android phone, there's an app that instead of having the keypad be fixed, wherever you put your finger becomes the 5, and everything maps around that. Like, apparently it helps for driving, but Raman innovated this out of necessity because he's been blind since he was a child. So let's just think about this. What would we have to do, right, to create an environment that Raman could demonstrate his potential at a Rubik's Cube, whatever that is, right, free of constraints? And clearly, teaching all the strategies in the world isn't going to matter unless we deal with a bigger problem, which is the way the cube was represented. Because color is an arbitrary choice. We forget that, right? It just seems like, of course, color represents the space on the cube. It's arbitrary. And there are other ways we could have represented it, right? So here's a beautiful example, right? See, it's got Braille on it. And at first when I see this, I think, that looks gorgeous. And I think, that's terrible design, right? Why is it white? Now Raman can use the cube, but I can't, right? We sort of do this a lot in education, by the way. Whenever we deal with this kind of variability, we'll end up creating another thing, and we start to lose economy of scale. So something basic like this, it wouldn't be hard to imagine just, something as simple as merging the two. These have Braille and color, right? So at that basic thing, we dealt with a representation that introduced some flexibility. And imagine we took this cube and we put it into a learning environment that taught the different strategies that were possible for people to reach their potential. Then we'd be somewhere closer to having a learning environment that really did deal with individuals and allowed for talent to rise, like TV Raman. Turns out he's also a record holder in the cube. 23 and a half seconds. That's pretty impressive. The thing is that that's not possible without good design. And I would argue good design isn't possible without thinking through the ways that your learners vary naturally. So what does that mean for thinking about something like education? Well, for starters, if there is that much variability in something as simple as a Rubik's Cube, think how much variability there is in something as complex as inquiry science, or learning to read, or learning another language, or just about anything else that we teach, where there's a lot more variables that actually matter, and there are a lot more ways to be successful at it. But this is the rub. In these environments, the myth of the average hurts us worse, because it means we are creating learning experiences that really don't fit for most kids. Now, they may be able to muddle through, but that's not nearly good enough. And in some ways, I think it's bigger than that. And I want to just talk about, in this country for a minute, positioned globally. We are, in the United States, one of the most diverse countries in the history of the world. That's a tremendous asset. We know that's an asset. To this day, we still accept more immigrants in this country than the rest of the world combined. It's astounding, right? And we should be even more accepting of that. But here's the thing. In this kind of environment, once again, the myth of the average is going to hurt us worse, because it leads us to create environments that work against what are our three greatest assets: the focus on the individual, our diversity, and our capacity for innovation. And another thing that really bothers me, where this average is really harming us, is in the way we assess learning. Not only in a school, but think about our love affair right now with global comparisons. It says the United States is falling behind on measures of things on average. I'm not saying that's good. I am saying that may not be the right way to think about it. When we compare ourselves to places like Finland, I love Finland. It's a great country. They should be applauded for their success. But they are 5 million people. They have a deep commitment to equality of educational opportunity. And they have roughly 3% of their students live at poverty or below. In the United States, on average, it's 24%. When you disaggregate the United States data by districts that only have 10% less poverty level, those districts outperform everybody else in the world by a long shot. So it may not be an issue of average performance. It's an issue of unequal access to quality resources. But then when we get so focused on improving the average, it leads us to do things, to use our resources in ways that may be counterproductive. So I think that the secret is not to try to win on average, but redefine this, to think about judging ourselves by our ability to create environments that truly nurture the broadest spectrum of talent possible. And it's a different game. And it will require rethinking a lot of things, but it's possible. So I want to end just by talking about the role of technology right now, because we are moving quickly to digital environments for education. Not because we see the potential necessarily, but because it's cheaper now. So we're moving quickly, and there is a tremendous opportunity to use the power and inherent flexibility of the digital medium to realize learning environments that are responsive to the individual. But it's going to require us making much better choices than we're making right now. It's not more expensive, but it does require different choices, and it requires the voice of people like you in the conversation right now. And I want to say, we look at the things that are coming out. By the way, I love my iPad, so if anybody from Apple's watching this, but the thing is we're mistaking where the innovation really is. Because this is a great textbook, right? You put it on an iPad, it looks gorgeous. But is it really better? I guess it depends, right? As it stands, it's a lot better probably if the existing textbook fit you as a learner. But the people that are going to get the most out of this are the people where it already fit. And the people in those margins where the true innovation often comes from are still locked out of any gains of this technology. But it doesn't really have to be that way. I want to make a claim, and I really believe this, that we shift this mindset that the revolution in STEM or whatever is not another $1 million simulation. It's guaranteed language support. It's guaranteed vocabulary support. It's all the things we need to provide access to the broader diversity of these students that we have, which are our great hope for the future. But I want to show you the reason why this is urgent to me and why we have to have a conversation and why you need to have a voice in this now is because we are making choices. They're being made right now, laying the foundation for this digital medium of education that we'll have to live with for generations. And so far, we're not making good choices. Let me give you an example. Text-to-speech. That's an extreme case. So TV Raman. That would be something we would need to have in an environment to make sure he's able to reach his potential, having something read to you, right? By federal law, we guarantee that any kid that actually needs that will get an alternative format of a book. And we spend, I think, roughly about $250 million of taxpayer money to guarantee that. And we should. It's the right thing to do. Amazon figured out how to do it for free. Anything that's put in their Kindle environment has free text-to-speech. And what's really cool about it is, as we look at the research, it's not just people who needed that. The so-called average student starts to use this text-to-speech in novel ways that are wildly valuable. For example, vocabulary in science is always a tricky thing. In first-year high school biology textbooks often have more new words, vocabulary words, than first-year foreign language textbooks. And those vocabulary words are not superficial. They stand for deep concepts. One predictor of how well someone will understand a vocabulary word is whether they pronounce the word right the first time they encounter it. So we start to see in environments that have text-to-speech, the average kid starts to use this technology in ways that advance their understanding. We just wouldn't have anticipated it. Now here's the problem. Amazon does this for free, and the publishers freak out. They said, it's going to cannibalize our audiobook sales. And then the CEO of Amazon wrote an open letter to the publishers and said, we have your data. This is not true. It's the exact opposite. People that have text-to-speech usually end up buying the audiobook because you know what? Most people don't say, I'm going to pass on James Earl Jones reading this for the robotic voice of text-to-speech. They are not the same thing, right? But it didn't matter. The publishers are nervous about precedent, right? And so Amazon stood up against this for a while, but nobody stood behind them. Nobody saw this for what it really is, which is the willingness to allow an old business model that's dying anyway to inject barriers into the new medium that do not exist. And the thing is that the taxpayer is still on the hook for this. The kid's still going to get the text-to-speech, but we could have done it for free. So now this is Amazon, text-to-speech at the bottom here, not enabled. It says the publisher has requested not to enable text-to-speech. This is one of the best-selling biology textbooks in the country. Why is it their choice? Right? It's because we don't quite understand the problem that we're facing. The public doesn't understand the opportunity that's available. So we need to do a better job of communicating that. So I just want to end by this to realize This technology is coming, and I'm telling you, as someone who plays in this area for a living, we can do spectacular things. We really can. We can have the kind of educational medium that we've dreamed about at 70 cents on the dollar. It's amazing, but it requires that we commit to choosing what we want this new medium to be. Do you want these technologies to be a collection of tools that make the average better on average? Or do you want them to be an ecosystem of educational opportunity that nurtures the diversity of our students and is capable of growing this broader spectrum of talent that we need to compete in the 21st century? I mean, I vote for the ecosystem, but it requires that we understand variability in a deep way and design for it. And it requires that folks like you start into the conversation now before we get something that we don't want. Thank you.